Twilight instantly turned onto her hooves and ran down the street next to her, panting and heaving as her worked legs as hard as they could to get her away. The powerful beatings of wings seemed to be coming from every direction now, the roar ever braiding through the town with every passing moment. Another stream of fire appeared before her, and her hooves instantly made up another turn. She didn't know where she was going, her head frantically still searching for some kind of clue. Was she going to be lost forever? Was there no way she was able to run away from the dragon forever? It was too fast. It was able to keep up with her, and its sentences meant that being able to find her easily. Was it really as far as she could go? From the corner of her eye, something appeared. She turned her head to try and look at it, but it was gone as soon as she noticed it. Whatever it was had turned down the road ahead of her. It wasn't the dragon, that's all she knew. She mashed up her hooves against the metal floor and turned down the road where she had seen it and followed it down the street. At the end of the street, she saw the movement again, making another turn. Where was it leading her? What could it still do down there to lead her? She already knew the monsters were just as afraid of the dragon as she was. It killed everything in its paths. If whatever was running away knew how to get away safely, all she could do was follow it. Another bellowing roar told her that she didn't have any time to think of the matter. A stream of the beam of fire spewed forth and melted the road in front of her, forcing her to turn down the path another creature had as well. The large flap of wings told her that the dragon was close, and the wind whipping her mane everywhere. She was down the street, looking at a particularly long one. Her chest began to burn, her limbs straining from the stress of the sudden exercise. Her eyes caught a glimpse of the object again, though this time a little clearer. She could have sworn that she saw a blur of pink turn the corner. Twilight nearly jumped out of her skin as the dragon landed hard in the metal before her, roaring loudly as it stood directly in her path. It swiveled and its mouth sewn closed down, fully extending to devour its meal in insanity. Her hooves then jumped as the mouth came inches away from her, making the dragon's next meal. Her body trembled and, rolling from the sun, jumped to escape from the dragon. She quickly got to her hooves and ran down the road that the pink blur had traveled. Her dragon's roar shook the earth once more before the heavy wings set off into the sky once more. The fast rhythmic thuddings of her heart played in her ears as her breath threatened down her. Her lungs were bursting, demanding her to have a chance to calm down. But the moment she stopped, she would be dead. Her eyes caught a glimpse of the pink blur once more, disconcerting as it was a tail. It had to be the tail of a pony. It was a pony leading her to this? Leading her away from the dragon? If so, couldn't she have been more grateful? She turned to the corner once more and almost came to a stop. That's impossible, Twilight gawed. Right in front of her, imposing down on her with large walls, what she was so familiar with was Canterlot Castle. This can't be here, she almost shouted. However, her words were drowned out with the loud roar of the dragon that was still right behind her. Without taking another moment to think about it, she ran straight for the door of the castle. She slammed her body first into the doors, hoping that they would just burst open, only to find herself bouncing backwards into the town. She stared at the doors before rushing up to pull the handle, trying to force open. The loud thud of the dragon landing came from right behind her. The doors were refusing to budge open. The dragon roared loudly, shaking the ground beneath her hooves, causing her to slip and land on her stomach. She looked at her head and then stared at the door, suddenly noticing that there was a keyhole for her. Without thinking, she pulled out the key that Pinky had given her with the note and jammed it into the lock. With a twist of the door gave a loud click, and the key disappeared into ash. She jumped into her hooves and swung the door open, just as the heat began to prick at the back of her neck. She jumped inside and turned, summoning her magic to grip the doors, just as the dragon's blazing flames began to spew. She slammed the door shut on him. She heard the mighty impact of the flames hitting the door, the light from the blaze creeping through the cracks from around the door. She took several steps backwards. watching as the fires blazed right behind her. For several moments, before finally dying down, she held her breath for several moments as she heard the thudding of the footsteps through them, the loud huff of the dragon smelling the door for any sign of her. Twilight swallowed hard, just standing still as possibly she could. Almost as if though it was a miracle. She heard the sound of the dragon's large wings beating as it took off into the sky once more. She stood frozen in spots for several seconds, waiting until the wing beat was long gone. Once she was for sure, she let out a heavy sigh as she had been holding inside of her body out, and felt herself collapse. Her body, heavy panting and beating heart, was all she could hear now. She was just thankful to be alive. She had laid there for a minute or two, just laying out of breath to catch up with her. Her throbbing of her heart moved from her head with her hooves, aching pains telling her that she'd run hard for too long. She groaned as she tried to sit up, not knowing what to expect. After all, Canterlot Castle had just magically shown up in the middle of Ponyville. On top of that, the key the Pinky had left her had opened its doors and saved her from being burnt alive. "Wait, Pinky," Twilight said, suddenly remembering the blurred pink tail that she had followed to use to get there. She twisted her around, looking for any sign of the pink mare, but all she could see around her was the blood-stained steel walls that surrounded her. The decaying portraits hung askew along the walls. Where the windows had been were now steel bars held together like chain-like fence. Twilight blinked in confusion, rubbing her head. "I feel like I've been here before," she murmured to herself quietly, looking down at the floor. They were normal gray tiles of Canterlot, only gray and rusted, with grime forming the cracks. "Did Pinky made it inside?" she asked, turning to look around the door as she came in. However, the door was now gone, and in its place a large steel wall that was made up the sides of the castle. The missing doors told her one thing. There was no turning back now. Just as though as it crossed her mind, a sound of her began to echo through the castle. Her ears perked up and she tried to listen to it closely, though it was a strange harmonic sound that just winding its way through the castle. It was music. The melody was quiet, but she was able to hear it well enough, almost as if the melody danced through the air, dull beats dragging from chord to chord. The instrument sounded like it hadn't been played in years, and was picked up just to be played with at every moment. It sent a chill down her spine, although she wasn't certain why. If there's music, there's gotta be a source. If there's a source, then I'll find a pony. She had thought for a moment before her ears flattened against her skull. Or would I find a monster, which is more likely? She swallowed hard. But I have to move forward. Pinky said that if I got here, I could save every pony. Just how do I do that? Twilight shook her head, trying to clear their thoughts and focus on what was important. The haunting melody was slowly crawling up at the castle. She had nowhere else to go but forward. She was thankful that she was in Canterlot Castle, though, rather than the malformed streets of Ponyville. Even if Canterlot was twisted and transformed, she would designed it like a cage. It was still Canterlot. She knew this castle like the back of her hoof. All she had to do was figure out where she needed to go. Stepping down in the alleyway, she honestly knew exactly where the entrance led. The main hall opened for her eyes, transformed and shaped in the way of the rest of the castle had been changed. Its open space that would normally be filled with ponies was going to their various appointments or jobs was a burden as everything else. Though the entire castle was built like a cage now, it didn't seem to obtain a single soul inside aside from her. Twilight's eyes wandered up the stairs where Princess Celestia would normally stand upon greeting guests or royal visitors. To gaze at the mural that adorned the wall, the normal depictions of Celestia raising sun and bringing grace to the land had been replaced. In its stead was a picture of Celestia, large towering in the center of the picture. Only one of the eyes were visible in the picture, colored in a deep red, and stared down at the carnage taking place. Below her houses and ponies being engulfed by flames, some were burning alive, some were running away and losing everything they ever held dear. Above the moon, that was pretty much eclipsing with the sun, creating a dark halo above the mentor's head. To the left of the mentor was a black circle depicting a triangle with the strange, twisted lines, the runic lettering around the circle. It had to the other side of her mentor was a symbol that she had seen a few times throughout town, a symbol that she had seen Magus drawing in to create a safe havens in town. A red circle had three smaller circles within it, surrounded by a runic writing. I've seen that before, but what does that mean? Twilight wondered curiously to herself. She stepped closer to the Merle, trying to get a better look, but as she reached the center of the room, she would hear the sound of metal hitting metal as her medallion began to buzz. She froze in fear in that spot and heard the metal clash together again. This time it was the sound that came directly from above her. Her head snapped and looked up and saw what looked like a giant chandelier moving onto the ceiling. A loud snap echoed throughout across the main room, and the large decoration came rushing down to greet her. Twilight jumped out of the way, covering her head, expecting the device to come crashing down. However, the sound of something heavy being yanked with change announced something had stopped and it hitting the ground midair. A shrill screaming and whine came from behind her. She turned her head to look at what had just happened. What she had thought was a chandelier was actually a great set of royal ornaments that seemed to have appeared to welded into a fleshly creature. A giant circular town consists of its flat back with its fleshy back of the creature arching into the empty space from the crown left. A tiara hung from one side, while a pendant hung from the other. The creature appeared to reveal armor welded into random parts of its body. While the rest of its skin was decaying, its front arms hung loosely to its sides, as if wanting to grab a hold to latch onto. Its back legs were broken and malformed, curled painfully into the crowns. Its head looked like a pony, but with its eyes missing, and its mouth was full, had once had flat teeth, were now jagged and broken. The grotesque creature swung its head, letting out a whining screech of pain, trying to twist and contort to find something to grab a hold onto. Twilight's ears flickered at the sound, as it really didn't like the sound of the creature. It was only in pain. It sounded like a creature was crying. The creature snapped its mouth closed and let out another pained cry. It knew someone had been there, but it couldn't see them. It couldn't sense them. It was almost as if the creature was alone, looking for a companion, but didn't know how to treat them right. It turned anything into its grips. Twilight just stared at the creature for what felt like minutes, before the rattling of its chains pulled the creature back upwards towards the ceiling. It calmed down, ceasing its wailing, and curled up into a regula covered of its body. When it reached the ceiling, it clicked back into position, remained silent once more, her medallion ceasing to its buzzing. She swallowed her nerves down once more, onto her hooves, staring up at the stairs to the Merle. She stared at the depiction of Celestia for a moment, then when at the ponies burning to death in the hooves. It didn't seem like anything Celestia would ever have in her castle, nor did it have something that praised her. No, it reflected something more of what she'd seen in one of many villains that destroyed Equestria's lands, hurt one of its citizens, and wanted downfall of the kingdom. But instead of any of them, it depicted Celestia. But Celestia would never hurt citizens, would she? Twilight wondered out loud. She had seen many times as a fool Celestia doing everything in her power to help people, to do what's best for every pony. When sacrificing her free time and duty to help some pony is less fortunate, the depiction of here didn't seem like anything she'd ever see Celestia doing. It must be this world, Twilight surmised. It's playing tricks on me, showing me pretty much things that aren't real again. She took a deep breath and looked at the stairs and branched off in her height left and right. She knew that the throne room was to her right, and something in her gut told her that it has to go the way to go. If there was a chance of saving every pony from this town, it was in that direction. With a deep breath for a resolve, she stepped up into the middle stairs that would lead to her throne room. At the top of the stairs, she was greeted with the new long hallway that seemed to rather stretch out farther than she could see. The hallway looked as if the one she was similar to with, but of course the metallic and rusted over the blood and grime, she wasn't even sure if it led her to where she wanted to go. Only one way to find out, she murmured to herself softly, and began walking. Her hooves echoed loudly around her as she walked. The steel bar windows only showed pitch blackness that lurked outside. The further she walked through, the more the windows began to change. Soon they changed from steel bars and chain-like fences to stained glass depictions of ponies. There were several different ones, and she had stopped just long enough to be viewed as to what was being depicted. One depicted pony being burnt to death on a stake. Another showed two ponies clashing each other with different weapons and set of armor. Another portrayed a pony being hung from a cord held by the moon, and another depicted a mother throwing her child into a hungry alligators below. Another showed a pony standing over the corpse of another, a bloody knife in its mouth. Another presented a dead angel being carried in the arms of a crestfallen pony. "I swear, I've seen these before," Twilight murmured, furrowing her brow at the images. But where? Her mind was just over her hooves and carried forward. Her thoughts mulled over the way until suddenly came to the end. Her hooves stopped when she stared at the large open room she had just found herself wandering into. It was Canterlot's large ballroom. The ballroom's here? But it shouldn't be, she murmured quietly. She walked deeper into the malformed ballroom. The stage where the bands had once gathered was now a giant cage, metal bars forming a circle around where the bands would play. Alongside the edges were a few long scents, the discarded tables that showed their age. The windows around the room were filled with stained glass depictions of ponies being burnt alive, suffering at the hands of the almighty ruler. Is there supposed to be something here? Just as those words left her mouth, she heard something rattle as the metal echoed around the room from behind her. She swung her head around to stare at the hallway she had just exited from. A metal door slammed shut across the hallway entrance. She was now trapped inside the ballroom. Her head turned back to look forward behind her, as sparks of electricity suddenly emanated from the air before her. Twilight stepped backwards. The electricity intensifying in the air, it seemed to grow dense. Suddenly the electricity stopped and a small portion of the world appeared to be twisted and turned, almost as if it was being sucked into a single point. A black dot formed in the air and began to grow in size, destroying the world around her of it. "Oh no," Twilight gasped, her heart dropping as the orb grew into the size that she was familiar with. The shadows of the black orb seemed to pulse through out of the center, and imitating a dull throbbing through the air. From the middle of the head emerged, from pulling away from the shadows and distortions, a black-skinned pony with a long snout, and white eyes seemed to emerge before her. It cracked open its swollen mouth and let out a guttural growl as the two chain-stained hooves slammed onto the floor behind her. It was that very same monster that had taken Lance from her and chased her down through Sweet Apple Acres. Twilight turned onto her hooves and ran. The cries of the black orb creature seemed to shake the air around her. The sound of its hooves slamming the metal once more. Twilight skidded to a stop as she remembered that her sudden exit was now blocked off. She now turned to face the creature, only to have an obscurely large ribbon been sun in her face and hitting her head hard. She felt her body getting flung, slamming down hard, and slammed against the metal floor as it rolled into a stop. Groans had escaped from her lips as she shakily got herself back to standing. She looked up at the creature. The two black ribbons that extended from the shadowy darkness now composed its body, snaked around the air before her. It took calculated steps as it dragged its body closer. Its growls seemed to have snaked the air right before its face. Twilight frantically looked around. She needed something to defend herself with. Out of all the times she wished she still had her sword. Her eyes fell into the abandoned table at the side of the room. She ran for it. She let the creature let out a bellowing roar as one of the ribbons slashed forward, slamming down on what she had been. She had reached for the table and slammed her body up against it and knocked it down, revealing wooden legs underneath it. She raised her hooves and slammed down on her leg in the air. the leg splitting off with a loud crack on the table. She levitated the broken chair leg with her magic and turned to face the creature. It was just as if the ribbon came swinging down from the table. Wooden splinters flew everywhere. Twilight covered her face as the tables exploded. She stared at the abomination inside all of the black orbs, slowly drawing closer to her. The ribbons were withdrawing that moment. Although being kicked around her head, she looked at the broken chair table leg that she was holding onto. It wasn't very sharp, and most likely she wasn't able to do a whole lot of damage with it. Even if she hit the ribbon, she'd just lose the weapon. No, she had to aim for the head. It was her only chance. She held the table leg in front of her, steeling her determination. The creature let out a loose roar as the large ribbons shot out of her to attack her. This time Twilight was prepared. She just ran forward, and her first ribbon smashing down on her where she had just been standing. The second ribbon was in front of her, about to snake out and strike her directly. With the percussion, she just jumped to the side, narrowly avoiding being struck by the leathery material. Her goal was right in sight. She could take her shot. Her hoof slammed down on the ground as she closed her eyes between the gap and the head of the blackened creature. She raised the table leg up over her head, and with a loud cry, she slammed it down on the creature's forehead. It raised its head back up as the damage soaked in, letting out a loud roar of pain. Twilight grinned, realizing that she dealt with a successful blow as she stood there a few feet away from the creature. She stared up and wailed in pain, wondering if it had been hit the brain. The fight would be over and there. Then the creature's head came back down, swooned parts of its mouth and broken the mouth open. A large fanged mouth came crashing down to bite down, razor-sharp fangs before it bore into Twilight's sides. Pains rocketed through her mind. Blood instantly burst from her mouth. Air no longer reaching her. Her hooves fell to the ground as the creature picked her up in its mouth. It bored its teeth into its body. She could feel every inch of them piercing right through her organs. Blood oozed from her mouth and body. Pain and rocked away and fought. The creature just let out a triumphant growl as it began to sink its back into the darkness, dragging her along with it. Her body came consumed and swallowed by the pulsing darkness. It seemed to have been crushed for every assistance of its being. She was drawn into the darkness. She felt free suddenly, like if she was floating. The world felt like it was spinning, and she saw something in her vision. It was her body. Her body was being drifted away from her, being chewed on by the darkness. But she was moving away from it. It was just her head. The world had spun around and her body disappeared, and then she saw something else. A long black sword just standing there in the darkness. For a moment, something in her mind told her that she had to get it, that she had no choice but to go get it. Then the world came rushing back, images of the darkness rushing away. The ballroom and the creature in the black orb had returned to her vision. She took in a powerful gasp of air, as if just moments ago she had been drowning, that she surfaced for air. Her body shook and took her breathing, as heavy and dragged. It was just a broken wooden chair that floated in the air, ready to be smashed into the creature's head. She stumbled and took a few steps backwards, her mind still reeling from what she had just felt. The black ribbon came rushing forward, striking her and slamming her directly against the wall. The back of her head just struck the metal before she fell, collapsing onto the ground as she whimpered in pain. The black creature let out a growl as if in triumph. Why did I? Twilight shook on the ground, her bruised tooth reaching up to touch her head. Her head had been detached from her body, but there was no way to look at it. She had been decapitated, punctured several times by sharp teeth. By all means, she should be dead. And yet here she was lying on the ground, battered and bruised from the beating she was receiving. The black ribbon swung down, and she found herself flying through the air. Her body came crashing down against the steel bars that had lined the stage, air escaping her body once more as she was hitting the ground hard. Everything hurt, everything was bruised. She coughed and felt blood escape from her mouth. The bitter iron of the taste was filling her mouth and her senses. The feeling of coming back, needing air, of something that needed to happen, but it didn't. She felt like it happened before, but that was just before she was about to be roasted, or whenever she saw Spike torn into pieces in her library. The same feeling she had experienced for the first, and then something changed. She had seen what happened. She had a glimpse into the future. The roar of the creature snapped her out of her thoughts once more, the air ever bending around her. Her body ached, but she had to shove that to the side for a moment. She couldn't just lay there. She just turned her head and then rolled onto her stomach, staring at the creature as if it slowly lifted one of each legs up and slammed down, drawing itself closer to her. Two ribbons flickered back and forth in the air, ready for the next strike. She had seen it. She had seen into the black sword of the body's creatures. One of the broke the alicorn that had to use to stab Rarity. The one that she used to kill the bloody abomination in the pool of blood. It was inside that thing and she had to get it. Her life depended on it now. If she could get it, she could win. One of the black ribbons wiped itself down from swinging around her for once more. This time she jumped out of the way, landing on her aching legs as it struck hard at where she had been laying. The creature let out a loud bellow as it began to churn, chasing it with ribbons. Twilight ran, beginning to run a circle around him. The ribbons then pulled back and whipped back and forth, just missing her. Its body couldn't move fast to her running, the turning allowing her to get around the creature. As far as she knew, she had only one chance at this, and she had to make it count. It may not even work, but she had to try. The creature roared and it lost its sight of her. Twilight then running around onto its back. She skidded to a stop and then ran straight for the creature, knowing full well that she was running straight into the orb of darkness. The creature tried to turn its head to see her, but she was already onto him. With a jump, she pressed her hooves into the dark of the bloody orb and clung. The creature roared, shaking every air around them as her hooves began to sink into the darkness that surrounded its body. She screamed in pain as she felt like the darkness was sucking her limbs away from her body, crushing them into the single point of the creature. But she couldn't help her but stop now. She had to get that sword. She gritted her teeth and pushed her body close into the abyss before her and shoved her hoof inside its body. The darkness felt like it was eating away at her flesh, and her hoof reached around desperately for its target. She shut her eyes tight, trying to focus all the thoughts that she could get away from the pain. She was slowly sinking deeper in the darkness. More of her body began to get consumed the longer she took to find the item. The creature was flailing about, trying to shake her off of its back, letting the world know that it was just as painful for him. Her hoof struck something hard and thin, her eyes opening wide. Without hesitation, she grabbed a hold onto it and pulled like it had been she never pulled before. Her back legs sunk into the darkness further, but her bloody forelegs were escaping. She withdrew her hooves, and just along with the creature, regaled black sword shooting out of the darkness. Bending her legs and she jumping off as much force as she could muster. She broke free from the creature's darkness and tumbled backwards, landing her on her side once more. The sword came clattering to a stop next to her as she weakly stood. The creature then shook and shuddered before slamming one of its hooves down, finally facing Twilight once more. She gently put a hoof down and stopped her body from shaking, just for a moment, and then stared at the creature in the eyes. The white features orbs stared back at her, the ribbons whipping back and forth with anticipation of its next attack. She had hurt the creature by plunging the sword out, wanting to hurt her back. Her magic grabbed the sword, pulsating the energy right through in front of her. The creature's swoon mouth roared and disorienting the air more than she had ever seen across the room. The stench of its breath pressed over her body as it shook her mane, but she stood firm in her spot. The creature lashed out, the ribbons heading straight for her to take her out. The sword flew almost like if it was cutting the air itself, blurring through every realms of the reality of its slice. Blood flew the air, and a thick portion of the leathery ribbon crashed into the ground. The creature howled in pain before withdrawing the severed ribbon as it finally disappeared into its body. Twilight began to walk forward towards the creature. The creature's eyes widened in realization. It threw its head back and launched at the remaining ribbon towards Twilight. Black flew in the air, just a haze of the darkness bursting forth, and another ribbon was sliced in half. The creature howled desperately, trying to get the ribbon to withdraw, sinking back into the black orb of its body once more. The head turned and stared directly at Twilight, its method of attacking exhausted. Then, with a burst of speed, Twilight ran forward straight for the creature. The creature raised its head and bellowed a roar, only for it swiftly to be silenced. The black steel of the sword pierced through its chin and through its skull, the world seeming to be froze around them at that very moment. Twilight then stared at the sword, remained glued to the position. The creature was not moving either, not even drips of blood coming out of the wound. Deciding that it was enough, she pulled the sword free from the creature's head, and the beast fell forward, slamming hard against the ground, as blood began to pour freely from its wound. It didn't shudder, it didn't shake, it didn't cry, it didn't move. It was dead. She had killed it. Her breathing was heavy. Her mind was almost like a trance-like state. Now that her hooves had her sword on it, it had taken everything out of her to take the creature down. But she had done it. She had saved her life. She had saved everyone else's life from this abomination. Just as she was about to walk away, the creature shuddered as she raised her sword up, ready to defend herself quickly. However, it then began to pull back inside its dark body, as if the orb was sucking in the leftovers from the fight. Bit by bit, the livery pony-like figure was pulled inside the darkness before it once more had vanished. All that was left was the pulsing dark of the black orb. She had stared at it, the confusion as the orb began to shrink down to size, wondering if perhaps it was going to disappear once more. But all those thoughts crossed her mind as the orb began growing. Again, it took another step back, wondering if it was just going to come back once more. She had to be stuck in this endless fight, but the orb grew past the size it had before. It kept growing and started to fill up the room. Twilight swung her sword, hoping to cut the dark orb from consuming her, but the sword just sailed right through it. Her eyes widened as she realized she couldn't stop it. She had to shut her eyes as tight as the darkness washed over. Her body just filled the room. But unlike before, when it felt into the darkness was consuming her flesh every second that she was in, she felt like just as if she was running and swimming through thin water. Her eyes opened slowly and all she could see was darkness. But all she could do was breathe, and it didn't hurt. She could even feel her magic still having a tight grip on her sword. With a flick of her magic, the sword vanished into a revisor for her safekeeping. She wasn't about to lose her best weapon so easily this time, but how she could understand what was going on. Why the orb had expanded that way? Why was she standing in the darkness? In the instance of the blinding light that appeared, Twilight squeezed her eyes shut. The bright light burned harshly. Her eyes having to be in the dark, gloomy world for so long, she had almost forgotten what the light bright was like. My, so it actually works. An elderly voice spoke up. Her eyes instantly shot open, and she turned her head forward to the source of the voice. Before her was a pony, glowing brightly despite the darkness. His coat was a dulled light blue, with a graying mane that looked like it had once been there before but had been blonde, with a scruffy beard to match. Around his shoulder and back was worn in a blue cloak that looked like it had been seen many years of use. "Hello there. I know this might be a surprise, but I'm Merlin?" Twilight asked, confused, her body collapsing into a sitting position as she stared at the apparition of her before her. She stared at and noticed that she could see him thoroughly. This wasn't Merlin in the physical flesh, but some kind of manufactation of him. "Ah, so you have heard of me. I wasn't so sure you would have, considering how long it must have been." He scratched the facial hair on his chin. "Though I suppose for you now, spells involving me can be fickle things." Wait. You mean you're the real Merlin?" Twilight gawked at it for a moment. She went to go raise her hoof ahead, but she realized a sharp stabbing pain of sensation coursing through her body. The shock of seeing one of her greatest greatest magical unicorns of all time, distracted her from the fact that her body was now covered in deep, darkening bruises and likely fractured bones. Her body was torn up in a mess and her head was now growing light. "Whoa, I can't have you passing out now," he spoke. His horn lit up in magic. She felt her body suddenly being wrapped with a warm glow. Consciousness was now returning to her slowly, though her body still felt achy. "By no means I am going to be able to help you heal with the limited magic the spell has, but I should be able to transfer enough magic to get you into keeping conscious for during our duration of the chat." "Merlin, but how is this possible?" Twilight stuttered in confusion, coursing through her mind.